Community members, we'd like to welcome back we welcome you back once again. Our young speakers today will share with us their experience, an aspect of their lives. So community members, I'd like you to put your hands together, to clap, to jump up, get on band, blow bugles, whatever it is, and let us welcome, representing New York State AIDS Institute and sponsored by the New York State Institute. Allow me to introduce Noah Sanatkar and Dionne Pendleton. Noah and Dionne, over to you.
Well,
Go
hi, good
ahead,
afternoon,
Noah.
everyone.
Yes,
All right.
go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Noah Sanatkar. I'm speaking alongside with Dionne Pendleton, and today we're going to be speaking to you about our stories, our journeys in regards to mental health in the workplace, as well as our personal stories. So Dionne, would you like me to go first, or would you like to go?
It doesn't matter. Either or.
Okay, I guess I'll just start. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So, as I mentioned, my name is Noah. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a 23-year-old queer and trans-identified American Iranian. My story reflects on my life navigating cultural sensitivity and acceptance, as well as reflecting on my mental health journey. Before I begin, I want to just state a trigger warning that today I'm going to be speaking about negative ways of coping, hospitalization, transphobia, homophobia. So if any of these may trigger any of you, please feel free to take the time and step away from your computer and implement some self-care methods. So as mentioned, today I'm going to be working on highlighting my hardships while emphasizing the importance of authenticity and working my way through the challenges that I've personally faced. By sharing my story today, if I could even help one person feel less alone, then I've done what I've set out to do. Today, we're going to dive into my story, and that means all aspects of it: the highs, the lows, unknowns, and in between. Starting at the beginning of my life, I was born premature, weighing 1 pound, 8 ounces. I came into the world struggling to stay alive. Despite the survival rate, I was coined a miracle, and my parents were told that I would continue to be a fighter to stay alive. Little did they know the theme of staying alive would follow me as I grew older. As you can see, these images are of me when I was in the incubator. As a little kid, I was in an incubator for about 3 months of the first 3 months of my life. We're going to be talking about discovering myself and what that means to me, and as well as my mental health journey. So to begin, it wasn't until my teenage years that I came to discover myself and find solace within my identities. I soon realized that my mental health was deteriorating due to not living my truth, but I still didn't happen to know what my truth was at the time. During high school, I fell into a deep depression and began experiencing anxiety attacks, as well as coping negatively with self-harm. I remember sitting in my mentor's classroom almost every day, hysterical crying because I felt like an imposter. At that point, he had seen me as my lowest. Running to his classroom, I coined my safe haven. I remember sitting there mustering the courage to tell him that I wasn't straight, and thought that I would never truly be accepted by friends or family for being who I am. When I did come out to him, I felt like I could finally exhale. He acknowledged that my family may not react the same way, to which he wasn't wrong, and told me to proceed with caution, but still encouraged me to live my truth. These photos are images of me prior to coming out, as well as discovering myself and moving more toward a expression that felt safe and comfortable for myself. Coming from an Iranian background, shame for being different in any way or not conforming to cultural expectations, such as being in straight passing relationships, conforming to gender roles within presentation, such as long hair or dressing feminine. This was all deeply rooted in me for as long as I could remember. Any difference in sexuality and gender identity is swept under the rug within my culture. I felt like it would be impossible to find acceptance from my family and to be authentic to myself. Coming out to my parents came with denial, restriction, and just overall microaggressions. As a teenager, I took a lot of that to heart, and it affected me negatively. I was simply trying to follow my mentor's advice, to continue to live my truth. A lot of their actions came from fear and love for me, not to justify that their actions were right in any way, but culturally speaking, their kid had just come out as queer, so they were going through a lot as well. I was able to recognize that they needed time to process, but it also contributed negatively to my self-esteem. I felt lighter coming to terms with my sexuality and being vocal about it despite my parents' disapproval, but soon realized again that I was holding my breath. I remember how vividly suffocating the length of my hair felt and the person dressed feminine looking back at the mirror was. I began to feel like a stranger. I began to experiment with my clothing, picking more masculine leaning outfits and allowing myself the freedom without self-judgment to see what I resonated with. As you can see on the left, this was me wearing more of the masculine clothing that I was experimenting with, and me then trying to closet myself to fit societal standards as well as my parents' approval of myself. It wasn't until my mental health took an even deeper turn for me to realize that I could no longer keep hiding this part of myself that was so desperate to be free and understood. At the age of 19, I was put into inpatient care. Imposter syndrome hit me once more. The hospital itself was an extremely scary time in my life, for it had crowned itself my lowest low. I was told by a nurse practitioner on one of my last days in the hospital to live my truth. I first thought it was just a coincidence that years prior, my mentor had told me the same thing. Thinking back on it, I believe it was more than just a coincidence. It was meant to truly have me understand within myself that I could be seen as myself. When discharged from the hospital, I promised myself that I would work toward living my truth, no matter what it took. I came out as Noah and non-binary when I was 19. To no surprise, my family did not take the news well. To this day, I have dealt with my parents' disapproval and openness about my trans experience. However, I have found solace in my intersectional identities and am passionate about speaking up and out for others. My experiences have not only shaped who I am, but the work I strive to do. In the last year, I've worked with an LGBTQ agency to share experiences, educate, and advocate for LGBT youth. My lived experiences have led me to this line of work, to work toward making others feel safe and seen within. I'm currently working toward earning my Master's of Social Work at UCLA, specializing in LGBTQ studies and mental health, and I'm extremely grateful to have this opportunity. If there's anything that I would pass on to others, it would be to continue and that you are seen, heard, valued, and deserve to stay. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Noah, for that. And once again, my name is Dionne Pendleton. Let's do a silent clap for Noah. That was very, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Once again, my name is Dionne Pendleton. I work with Action for a Better Community under the High Impact Prevention Services for Youth. And I just wanted to share my work experience and some knowledge that I have with you guys. So I'll just jump right into it. So as a youth intervention specialist, I work with youth between the ages of 13 to 24 daily, weekly, monthly. And prior to this, I took a smart survey to talk with youth in understanding where they are with mental health and education. So I'll start with that. I took a survey of 100 youth, and the questions were as followed. Have you ever suffered from mental health, depression, or suicidal thoughts? What does mental health look like to you? Who do you speak to about mental health? Are you willing to learn about mental health? And what's the biggest stigma against mental health? 70 out of 100 stated that they have that they have been depressed, sad, or have had suicidal thoughts. 27 out of 100 stated that mental health is just another word for crazy, and we don't focus on that in this community. 82 out of 100 stated that they don't have anyone to speak with, except sometimes friends or a close family member, maybe one or two max. And out of them all, 100 were willing to learn. So in this community, mental health of the LGBT community is on the rise and is not being treated or looked at as closely from others. Working in this field, on an average of 1 out of 2 youth that I come across are experiencing some form of mental health. On top of mental health, they are balancing acceptance with their race, sexuality, and being safe in the world and from the public eyes. The youth are looking for outlets and assistance, and the cry for help can come in many various ways. Mental health in this community isn't heavily addressed, and when someone is vulnerable enough to open up about how they feel and what they are going through in this community of being Black, brown, you only hear that therapists aren't for us in this community. Go get some help, go get some ear, and mental health is code word for crazy. Youth that I have experienced with sometimes with the mental capacity wasn't strong and it wasn't available, or even come across, they just didn't have outlets and couldn't speak to anyone. I live by a proverb and I tell my youth that it takes a village to raise one child. This village is their community, and us as the providers, how can we be that community for the youth? So I broke down the word community. As providers, we have to think about causes and factors of mental health. O is for open. Are we open and willing to understand what their mental health illness looks like? It can come in different shapes and forms. For those of color and being LGBT, it may not be your average breakdown of crying or being sad. It can be through the appearance or a total lack for one's health, or even an induced sex drive that can cause them to just throw their body away. M is for mental. Mental, it means relating to the mind. None of us have telepathic powers, although it would be great, but we need to ask questions and never assume. I always tell my youth that they have to be the writer of their own storybook, but learning to become your own author can be difficult, especially if you have a mental health battle going on. The second M is for mercy. I chose this word due to the fact of trying to put myself into the shoes of one with mental health. They want mercy and help from those that provide the work, and it's up to us to provide it for them. Show compassion, assistance, and guidance to help. They can be lost, confused, and struggling. And if you aren't a part of the community or even a part of color, it's easy to judge and ridicule what you don't understand. U is for understanding. We all hate being prejudged and most likely dislike when someone is trying to judge us in a situation that they don't understand. I was explaining a situation to an older friend and they just weren't understanding anything I was saying to them. I got more and more frustrated in the midst of it. And in the midst of it all, I was thinking, I'm never going to open up to you again. Do we do this with our youth sometimes? N is for neglect. The youth most likely has been neglected. They need help, or even when they believe that no one is there or they do receive help, it's not help to properly help them. It's up to us as adults to raise the children in our community. I is for individuality. All mental health individuals aren't the same. Some may require things that others don't. In my line of work, I have access to different youth, and I individually have to know how to work with them, figuring out what's best for them. Some love music, while others may love to cook. and some may just love to be outside to get their mental capacity together. Think of it as a harm reduction, meeting the youth where they are and making steps towards progress so that way we can all work together. T is for teamwork. If you are working with the youth and not sure of something, it's okay to outsource and get assistance. As new generations get older, they face different challenges that some of us may not have had to face. For example, in the 80s, it was against the law for men to wear women's clothing. And now everyone is filled with clothing and so comfortable with outward appearances. Why? It's for youth. Just a reminder that we are working with the youth. They can be indecisive, carefree, difficult, and fun. So who are the advocates? What do the advocates look like and where do they come from? As a youth intervention specialist, I take this role seriously. When the youth don't have a voice for themselves, it's essential for me to speak up for them and to help cultivate them to speak for themselves. As of now, they are still learning and still growing and figuring things out and tackling this beast called life. Think of a time when you were younger and you had trouble at school or when you felt lost. Most of us went to mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather. As we got older, maybe an older cousin, a sibling, to help fight our battles. And then when we wanted a little bit more privacy, probably a doctor, where we didn't want anyone else to know anything else. That advocate makes you feel warm, safe, protected, and offers a hint of love, so that way you know that you're definitely in a non-judgmental zone. I had a youth that I worked with. He was in a home where he was being abused mentally every day. He couldn't express himself. And he couldn't even have a normal conversation with his family. The youth and the mother reached out to me. They were trying to understand each other, but they were just on two totally different pages. The mother was ready to wash her hands because she just couldn't understand what was going on. She was used to crying, depression, and the youth just wanted to run away. The youth's mental wasn't very strong, and he had multiple suicidal thoughts that entered into his brain. As an advocate of the community, I put the youth and the mother through an intervention where they were able to see each other's viewpoint, but being a part of this community and helping her see the viewpoint of her child. As a loud and proud advocate, they were able to put their differences aside. Educationally, thankfully, the awareness of mental health is increasing, and we all are being educated on how to navigate with mental health. Also, thankfully for this platform, so we can help each other out and share knowledge and information that we get from each other. Yet, what does that look like for people of color, let alone people of color that are of this community? How can we evaluate the mental issue and change it for the better? In my line of work, I always remind the youth that being educated in mental health isn't anything to be ashamed of. We have to knock down barriers and stigmas within our community. If no one is our advocate, then who will be? We have to be resilient in this matter. So once again, I'll leave you with this. When you're speaking with the youth, when you're working with someone in this community, or even questioning how to help someone, have you ever suffered from mental health, depression, or suicidal thoughts? What does mental health look like to you? Who do you speak to about mental health? Are you willing to learn about mental health? And what's the biggest stigma against mental health? And it's okay to be kind, be honest with your youth when you don't have the answers and you need to figure things out. They're a sitting open book, just like you and I are. And last but not least, I'll leave you with this number. It's a mental health number that's open 24/7 for anyone who may need to talk or just receive a listening ear. The number is 833-637-3501. Once again, that's 833-637-3501. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Noah, and thank you very much, Dionne. That was actually really quite important, really quite necessary to hear, especially from you two young people. Dora, do you want to jump in here? I see there are also some questions coming in from in the chat. Dora?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. I am Dora Swan, and I work with both Dionne and Noah as the contract manager for the contracts that they work on in New York State, and we're super fortunate to have them. as you have seen, be part of our programs working directly with young people. So both Noah and Dionne have a ton of experience working with young people. Here in New York State, we use a youth development model, which looks at young people's strengths and assets rather than the negatives that they bring to a situation. So you may have heard that kind of tone in how both Noah and Dionne presented information. And I wonder if people have questions. Do you want to put them into the chat? Is that how you want it to go, Antoine, or would you?
Yes,
Okay.
preferably if there's a chat. And I see that Sankofa has asked a question, which I was going to ask as well, but then I will ask another question that ties in with what Sankofa is asking about.
Okay,
Would anyone who is not speaking, please mute their microphones. Thank you. Go ahead, Dora.
So the question is, Sankofa says, it's very important what you said about how a mental breakdown in LGBTQ and BIPOC youth may look different than a mental breakdown in white and straight youth. Can you speak more to this? And is there any research on this that you can share? Dionne, that came from you. What's been your experience with how young people kind of present when they're having a mental health breakdown? You have a lot of experience one-on-one with young people.
Yes, so just my experience, just from like my analyzation, usually what it would look like, being around like a straight up population, it would be more on the outward appearance, like more of crying, and then for guys, it'll probably be a little bit more neglection, but a lot more destructive. And I noticed like dealing with the LGBT community and those of color, when you come across like depression, things like that, it's looked down sadly upon in our community. So they find other outlets to do that. And so that's why I say sometimes there's a induced sex drive, but it's an induced sex drive, but they're not using protection. Or they would change like, oh, sorry, that was another, or they would change like their outward appearance. Like they constantly will change, like get into a new look, or constantly cut their hair or dye their hair, or their weight may fluctuate up and down, or they'll play with like crazy colors just to get attention. So that's just what I noticed from the research or the things that I've gathered in the analyzation from just that community in my line of work. But definitely an induced sex drive, and they just kind of just go from person to person trying to get like that love and that affection that they're not receiving at home. So they go from person to person, not really making any bonds, but just having that small, happy, enticement.
Mm-hmm. And both Dionne and Noah, when you're seeing behaviors like this, or you're running into people like this, how do you reach out? How do you open the door so that young people, I guess, trust you to ask a question or to make a referral? You've said you don't have to have all the answers. You can certainly make a referral, but how do you open that door so young people will speak with you?
I start by being honest, and I start by giving them a story that's relatable, that I went through, a personal experience that they can relate to know that, hi, we share the same background. It may not be the exact same storybook, but we have some of the same experiences. Like you left home early, I left home early. You probably got bullied or something like that in high school. I went through something like that in high school. So I try to share an experience that we both can connect on to let them know that I'm still a human being. I'm not just somebody trying to provide a service to get them in and out of the door.
Right. So you make that connection with that person. Sometimes that takes time. It might not be the first time you meet with them, right? Because you meet with young people over time as well.
Over time, yeah.
Yeah. So here's another question. From your experiences, each of you, can young people manage and cope with mental health issues? And what can be done to relieve them of the shame and stigma surrounding mental health? And boy, that's for all of us, isn't it? There's a lot of shame and stigma surrounding mental health issues. So what kinds of things can one do to kind of relieve them of that shame and stigma?
I think first and foremost, creating a space in which youth can feel comfortable coming in and being where they're at, being seen and met where they're at in their mental health journey, whether they're in a detrimental period or whether they're on cloud nine, just having a space to have this open dialogue, to share, and, making sure that they feel seen and heard and are respected properly. And definitely not pushed. As I said, starting where the client is, starting with what they're coming in with, they're presenting problems, and seeing what they want to work on within themselves. Because a client can walk in and they can be going through a multitude of different issues, but the most pressing issue is, being able to sit with them and break it down and allow them to understand that, okay, you're coming in with all of these things. We want to address all of these in an orderly fashion, in a way that'll help you feel most beneficial within your mental health journey. So how do we do that? So allowing them to sort of navigate where you go with it, not giving them like, we're going to speak on this today. Allowing them, being able to sit with them and say, okay, I'm hearing all of this. Where do you want to start? What do you want to talk about? And also too, as practitioners and just human beings in general, we're not going to always understand things. We're not going to understand everything that somebody's coming to us with. So being able to also acknowledge that and be aware of that and say, I understand that I can't understand, and allowing that open dialogue and building that rapport to continue on definitely would be beneficial. I believe so. Thank you for that question.
That's great. Thank you, Noah. What advice would you give teens who are in an unsupportive home that doesn't accept who they are or embrace them to discover themselves, since they have to go back to that draining space every day? What could you say to them? Noah, that sounds like your life, right? I mean, you come from an Iranian background, which, from the little that many of us may know about the culture, may not be one that's very supportive to people who are from a different kind of experience. So what was that like, being home every day? As much as you want to share, and then what advice do we give to young people who are in that kind of a situation about, going on, keeping on?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Natalie. So from personal experience, as it's in my teenage years, going back into a space in which, oh, I'm sorry, okay, my apologies. I heard my echo for a moment. Going back into a space that, was unsupportive, and up until very recently, I was still, in that space. I just found that I had to find other ways of coping. And it wasn't just negative ways of coping. Definitely, there are many other safer, healthy ways to cope with these issues. I found that journaling was very helpful, listening to music, going outside, anything that really, truly, reminding yourself that outside of these four walls that you walk into at the end of the day, there's a whole plethora of people who will support you. That is definitely something that kept me going when I was in that space, and, finding that community. And it's very hard because, it's easy to say community's out there, but when you're actually in the depths of it and going through it, it's very difficult to see that. So just allowing yourself to know that, even if it's not good right now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be that way forever. And that's something that I had to remind myself constantly about. So that's what I would say to that.
That's great. Thank you, Noah. Anything to add to that, Dionne?
That was such a great question, such a hard question to answer as well. But definitely kind of on the same brink of Noah. I definitely tell my youth to find other outlets or other sources to refill their energy cup, because that's definitely energy draining. And and it does suck, but especially when they're just a child and not even at the age of an age to leave the house, or to really be out and about or even provide for themselves. So I definitely tell them to find other outlets, find other programs in the city, get with like-minded friends, talk to counselors at the school to get you connected with other partnerships in your community, so that way they can have an outlet, just to make sure that they have a safe space to feel like themselves, to still become into their own individual.
Yeah, and you speak about referrals, Dionne, and that's really important. And that relates to the next question that came in from Chuck, which talks about the kinds of referrals that you all make to teens who are exhibiting severe and persistent mental illness, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And I do have to say that each of you, you're not independent operators out in the community. Both of you are connected with well-established programs in your communities that provide mostly HIV prevention services, but a lot of other supportive services to young people in your catchment areas, and have lengthy referral libraries for young people for a number of issues, whether it's housing or food insecurity or mental health issues. So how do you make those referrals, Dionne and Noah?
Well, I first sit down with the youth. I put them through my own interventions to see where they are mentally. If it is too extreme, I definitely partner with an organization called Trillium here, because they have doctors on hand and psychiatrists on hand who can help if it gets too deep with schizophrenia and those other type of in the bipolar disorder, I think I heard as well, just so they can have help and comfortable help. And also I go with them as well. It's not like I'm just handing the youth off to someone else and now they're back to ground zero trying to reestablish trust and things like that. So I hand the referral off to an organization that has those resources that I may not have to assist all the way. And then we just continue on with the process to make sure that they're okay, and that they're on the way to becoming more sound with their mental health.
Someone just added something here. Judith added something about having two siblings, both men. She's the oldest and only daughter, and her brother carried a secret since he was 14 years old, and now he's 27, and this past summer decided to talk to her about his sexual orientation, and she cried and cried. As they were raised in a religion, culture, and country, it's never been an issue to have friends with different orientation. It was just different to handle the situation with a close family member. She's still worried about how her parents will handle it, and truly felt sad and bad about not being a good sister for him. And I would suggest that if your brother spoke with you, that there was some trust there, and that you've created some openness, right, for your sibling to come to you. Noah, you have siblings, is that correct?
Yes, I do. I have an older brother.
For you to come out to one of your siblings.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Jordan?
What was it like for you to come out to your siblings?
Yeah, so I could really resonate with what you had mentioned, Judith. And first and foremost, I just want to reassure you that you're not being a bad sibling to your brother. This is something that he had to feel comfortable coming to terms with to tell other folks. And unfortunately, it did take a few years, but that's not a reflection of you in any way. So I'd just like to put that out there prior to answering the question. So continuing on, coming out to my own brother, it was definitely a struggle. He was supportive in the beginning, and then he sort of reverted back, and now we're at a good place in which he's supportive again. And thankfully it's staying that way. We've built a really great relationship throughout the past couple of years, but initially speaking, there was a lot of safety issues. I had dealt with, threats of him saying that he would out me to my parents. And as a 16-year-old, that was the end of the world for me. So, I really feel like it takes time. So given that, Judith, your brother did take his time to come to terms with himself and accept himself and then move forward and talk to you about it, that definitely has a lot of trust in that, and just continuing to build that relationship with him and see that part of himself. I feel like you two are on a great track to continuing on your relationship together. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I do want to say that, one of the things that COVID has brought about is this opportunity to have these sort of presentations on Zoom where there are chat boxes where the presenters who don't ordinarily get to know what the thoughts are of the people who are in the audience, they get to read as we're going along. So right now what they're doing is juggling lots of plates. They're reading all the lovely things you folks are saying about them, and they're listening to me ask them questions, and they're coming up with the answers. So kudos to you all. But it is really lovely that folks are writing these supportive, wonderful things. Wouldn't it be nice if we could see these balloons over everyone's head that we shared our day with on a daily basis, telling us how terrific we are. But there you are, guys. It's just great. So here's something from Ashley. What are your thoughts on the conflict between honoring individual identity and coming from conservative and collectivist home cultures? As a first-generation queer Asian American, this is something I struggled and continue to struggle with often. Dionne or Noah, what are your thoughts about that conflict? Honoring individual identity and coming from a conservative and collectivist home culture.
It's such a conflicting thing to have, especially it's a battle within yourself. Great question, by the way, a very great question. And I can even connect to that because I come from a very spiritual church background, and here I am openly proud as a queer Black man. So it's definitely conflicting, but I definitely push on my youth to just live in their own truth. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have these life experiences that cultivate us into who we are. And who's to say that that isn't the experience you needed to help out another youth who may be struggling with the same thing that you're struggling with now. And then so that way they may be able to ask you the same question. But I definitely force my youth to walk into their own truth because they have their own life to live. They have to write their own storybook. But yeah, that's mostly what I do. I just push them to focus in on themselves. It's just such a conflicting thing to live with because you don't want to go against family. You don't want to like disappoint, your loved ones, and you don't want to be cast aside, but you want to be who you are. So I definitely have them, walk in their truth and find outlets that help them feel more comfortable because you want to feel loved and accepted. So that's what I kind of focus on with my youth when they come across those conflicting situations.
Anything to add, Noah?
Yeah, just piggybacking on what Dionne had mentioned, I think it is very complex and it is, person by person. It's trying to navigate between how do you stay true to yourself while how do you not sacrifice your own identity while trying to also navigate familial situations. And I find myself continuously still working through that. So I really think it's something that it's continuously going to be a work in progress and something that there's really no proper answer for. And my apologies on that, in that I don't have the answer for that. But really, truly, I believe that allowing yourself to feel comfortable within yourself first and foremost is, extremely liberating. Allowing those spaces elsewhere to be able to be your authentic self is something that I found really, really important for myself, given that I didn't get that from family. So I understand, the conflict that you're having, and I resonate with your struggle. So just know that you're not alone, and there are so many other spaces in which you will be seen as your true self. And unfortunately, it is hard to navigate with family and cultural identities and these intersectionalities that we, come across and have to go through. But it definitely is a case-by-case thing. And I appreciate you continuing to try to live your truth on that as well, while navigating that. I definitely know it's not easy. So thank you so much for sharing that.
A question, it looks like it's for Antoine. How do LGBTQ plus youth navigate their adoptee chosen communities? You're on mute, Dionne.
I'm sorry, is he asking like how do they choose their
How do they navigate their adoptee and chosen communities? How do they navigate? I guess if they're new to the community, how do they kind of find a place to fit? Are there mentors in the community? How do they navigate that community?
I would first start them off by trying to find LGBT friendly centers, communities. For example, like there's a MOCA up here in upstate New York. There's a Evergreen in Buffalo. So trying to find those centers first. And then you will run into other youth in the community, and then making friendships and partnerships from there is how I would guide a youth to start. So that way they have like a safe space first, and they're meeting people, like-minded individuals who are going through the same type of struggle in a non-judgmental free zone, and then working and making connections from there. And also those organizations will be able to connect them with other people in the community, whether it's connecting to the ballroom scene or connecting to a fashion scene or just other like-minded LGBT individuals in that community. So I would tell them to do that as a first step, or even so going to, you know, even social media is a great way to find out where to go in your community, and looking up on pages and sites in that platform to know where to navigate to be around more like-minded youth individuals.
That can be kind of scary though, especially for young people, right? With social media these days and being careful about what's on social media. This is the mother and grandmother speaking. you could hear that come out right away. But so, you're 15, 16 years old and you're looking for your community online. I mean, how careful, or what does one do to find the right place to settle, to get answers from the right folks, to find the right folks to meet up with for coffee or whatever, to talk?
I would definitely tell them to start once again on those centers sites, those type of forums, because they have
The
forums on those
community-based
sites.
organizations.
Yes, the community-based organizations.
Okay.
Start on those forums, and then because they will know for it that this is legit. This is a real organization. This isn't anything untrustworthy. There's HIPAA laws, there's laws, bylaws, there's an address, there's a zip code. Everything is here that I can meet other like-minded individuals. So I would have them start there if they do take a social media route. But of course, I'm definitely with you on the be careful about the social media aspects. You don't know who's behind the camera.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, we are at the point where we need to wind up. As you can imagine, even though it's felt like 5 minutes, we are at the end of our time together. So I would like to take the time to thank all of you for asking such thoughtful and respectful and supportive questions. It's never easy speaking in front of a group. I think Dionne and Noah did a fabulous job. I'm so proud to be working with them every day. And I look forward to seeing what their futures bring them. But if we could just give a round of applause. I don't know if we have reactions down the bottom that are maybe clapping hands that we can all put on our screens to show Dionne and Noah our love and appreciation for them stepping out and speaking with us today. And thank you to the conference for bringing us folks from New York to a larger platform so we can share with you.
Thank you so much, Dora, for moderating this session, which was amazing. There's so many amazing things that came out from Noah and Dionne, and we just want to thank you for your time, for sharing your experience, for your compassion and support of working with young people, but just sharing your story, Noah. I think that's going to resonate with so many people today from the conference. And a special thank you to the New York State Department of Health AIDS Institute, to Doris Swan, to Craig Pennell, and to Joanne Moore. And I don't think Joanne is with us today, but I know Joanne is very busy and has supported this conference since its inception.